I'm a pastor in the First Christian Church, Disciples of Christ, which is Christian Church, Disciples of Christ denomination. And we have a biannual General Assembly. And Martha Grace was able to speak to us in 2 workshops. I had heard about the book, and people were excited about it, but I had not read it. But after going to our General Assembly, I came home and read the book immediately, and then gave it to the head of my evangelism ministry team. I said, "You've got to read this book." And the most exciting thing that began to happen was that he became excited after he read it. The man is in his late 70s, has done evangelism his entire life. He said, "This is the best book ever written on evangelism I have ever read. Can we do this?" I said, "I think we should." And so from there, it took off like wildfire. Pastors are always getting ideas and conferences and programs and books. I want to take this back to my church. And in my 30-some years of ministry, I've never seen one of those really take hold of a congregation and go. This one did. Well, one of the things, I think the word that we try not to use is program, because it isn't a program, it's a process, and has been for us. And the best way to describe is making cold hearts warm. You know, it's easy to have people with cold hearts in churches, but it's much more difficult to have them burning with some heat and passion. Martha Grace writes in a very easily read format. She tells the story, she tells the issues, and even people in my congregation, for example, a man who said after the evangelism team decided they needed to read the book, he came out and said, "I got to read a book. I don't read books." I said, "Are you going to wait till the movie comes out?" He says, "Oh, is it coming out in the movie?" I said, "I don't think so." But a month later, his wife told me he had read the book once and was going through it the second time. She said, "Honestly, Bruce, he hasn't read a book in 30 years. It caught his imagination. You know, the average fellow in the congregation, most guys don't like to read, I know that. But it excited his heart and his soul. And that's what we have seen over and over again through the process. The key factor as we developed it is the prayer triads that she talks about in her book. I mean, it was one of those things that we hadn't been doing. I had been trained in spirituality in seminary, but this just pushed us that next critical step of being in prayer with one another, and it's changing lives and changing the congregation. Well, it begins within the heart of the person. It goes even back further. And the prayer triads involve people in prayer and faith sharing, to share something deep of their need, what they need prayers for, and they pray with one another. And that process of learning how to faith share with another person of faith that you can trust is the first step in learning how to share your faith outside the church. You know, we can't just say, "Okay, go out and share your faith with everybody in the world," and the people stand in church and go, "How? I can't even talk to my person in the pew next to me about faith." Well, that's the natural first step. And so it's an integration of what has to happen. I just attended a Presbyterian conference called Deep and Wide, and I think that helps describe it. We have to be spiritually deep and grounded so that we can go wide with our sharing of our faith relationship with Jesus Christ. And you can't do one without the other. They're intricately connected. One of the most interesting experiences that I had, a woman who was going to lead one of the small groups said to me, "My husband signed up." "Oh, well, that's nice." She said, "No, you don't understand. He signed up on his own. People invited him and he signed up. And he doesn't even know how to look anything up in the Bible. He's never read the Bible. He's just gone to church with me. He's joined churches with me. He wants to be a part of this. He's decided to do it, and was drawn in by the basically evangelism appeal within the congregation that we were just talking about. And he's now an active part of a Sunday school class and taking other leadership roles in the church. One of the most powerful experiences that I'll be sharing with the whole conference today was the issue around, do we have a dynamic worship? Is it powerful enough? Is it happening? And people were feeling like it wasn't. And inevitably, as the pastor, senior pastor, do most of the preaching, well, is it the preaching of the pastor? And all of a sudden, some issues were starting to come up, and I'm going, oh my goodness. So I'm re-evaluating after 30 years of ministry about preaching and all of those kinds of things. We get into the middle of this, and we've ended up reducing number of services to try to get more people in one room kind of thing to build that. Well, maybe that was working. But after our spiritual experience with Unbinding the Heart, the primary book you use with the congregation, the chair of our congregation came up and said, this worship is dynamic. Things are changing in this church. I wouldn't have invited a friend to church, but I will now. And she said, you know what? I was in on conversations about the preaching and the worship. I'm not sure your preaching has changed much at all. I think we have changed. And we're hearing what God wants us to hear because our ears are now open. That's when the pastor falls on the floor and faints. When you hear that kind of dynamic, powerful change from one of the leaders in the congregation. Well, the next step, we spent the last 18 months going through the process. We've had great coaching from Martha Grace and her coaches and have been helpful. Our next step is the second edition of Unbinding the Gospel has prayer journal in it, which was not in the first edition, which being a beta congregation in the first experimentation with this whole process. So we're going to use that devotional piece at the back of that book for our Lenten study and connect it into the Lenten themes and to try to get back to that again. We are watching our Sunday school classes. First Christian Church is the one who compiled on the website the material for the youth and children, which had not been written at this point by Martha Grace and her team. And my team said, we've got to have it. We want children to learn how to pray. Fantastic to watch what do the children's departments need and at youth so that they can continue their prayer life. And we're seeing dramatic strides in that with children saying, I learned how to talk to God. In front of the whole congregation, this child made this witness. We have continued what is called the prayer wall, where prayers are posted, and after 4 weeks, they're dropped off into a file box. People said, we've got to keep that going. The triads are continuing in most Sunday school classes. There's a triad that or a small group of triads that has continued on Thursday nights, and we're supporting that. We're looking at starting more small groups for people who didn't get into it this time or want to start again into the process. And we've got a group that's called the accountability group that we evaluated everything all the way through at the end of our spiritual experience and came up with several items we want to really focus on. And the event team group that planned the whole thing is meeting regularly to say, how are we doing? Are we accountable? Who's accountable? Why is it not being done? Is it being done? Yes, it is. It is great. So and this was the congregation saying they wanted to do this, which was just wonderful as from a pastor's standpoint to see that happen. I would just emphasize the spirituality and the prayer time, how critically it is to sit down and share with one another in deep prayer. That has made the world of difference for First Christian in Peoria.